Hello, it's time for another silly dyno video. Probably the silliest one yet. Most people with a rolling road would put a car on here that they're trying to squeeze more power out of, and they're trying to get it up to 300, 400, 500, 600 horsepower so they can brag to all their mates in the pub. This video is kind of like that, but completely different. Because today, I'm putting a Trabant on a rolling road. This Trabant. Otherwise, that would be a really weird coincidence. It's a Trabant 601S. Now, you might think S stands for sport or sportif or stradale. No, it stands for Sonderwunsch. This is Trabant 601S. It's a 601S Universal. It's an estate. It's an estate. It's not in a state. It's actually quite good, although half of that is because the body is plastic. So in the future, I'm hoping to do a road test on this car when the weather and timings and everything agree and the car doesn't play up. I want to get outside and I want to get to know this car because I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by the whole Cold War thing. I'm fascinated by the history of this car and kind of what it came to be. And I know for a fact, well, it's not a fact, is it? It's still subjective. But I know that a lot of cars get stick from people when they don't necessarily deserve it. So I'm keen to learn more about this car, but I thought the most important thing I could do with this car is find out how much power it has. I'm going to guess not a lot. In the very late 1930s to early 1940s, there was I can't say disagreement. That is copyright. Skirmish. There was a skirmish in sort of Central and Eastern Europe between some sides, and in that skirmish, there were some people who were against these people, and these, we would say, were the baddies, and they were the goodies. And then, at one point, a team that was on the baddies team, i.e. a big player in that team, joined forces with the goodies because they realised the baddies were being bad, and the baddies tried stitching them up behind the scenes, which was out of order. Basically, they all joined together and they defeated the baddies. And when they defeated the baddies, a bit of the land that was key in the whole skirmish was divided. And it was divided because the people who came together eventually to fight the baddies fell out a little bit for the next several decades and basically had differing ideas on how life should be.
I've heard some rather disturbing reports about you.
Such as?
Such as the fact that you're spending so much time with people who are nothing but communists.
Nothing but communists. Well, maybe there's nothing but communism for people who aren't afraid to think.
In the western side of the divide, there people had Volkswagen Beetles and 2CVs and Minis and everything else that we know today. On the other side, they didn't have quite as much choice. And this was it. I mean, if you had money, to be fair, you wouldn't have necessarily had to buy a Trabant. You could have bought yourself a Fiat or a Lada or something like that. Although if you had money, they probably would have taken it off you and leaving you with a Trabant. These were popular cars. The 601, they made 2.8 million of these. And everyone laughs at them, looking at them, because you see the fact this is A-Reg and you think, is that some sort of joke? No, this actually is from the early 80s. But when it first came out, this wasn't like, I know it looks a bit ridiculous for an 80s car, but when it first came out, this wasn't actually that behind the times. There was some quite clever engineering with these cars. They're fully independent suspension all the way around, although it is a traverse leaf spring, which is not ideal. But yeah, it's a fully independent system all round. The engine wasn't, well, we'll find out later on, but it wasn't low on its power for the day. Duraplast body, reinforced cotton fibres. It's not actually a plastic car, it's a metal car, it's just got plastic panels. I mean, yes, it does look a bit like an Austin A40, but that's where the similarities end. So I'm not here to do a history lesson because I won't do it justice, and I've already offended people, I'm sure. So what I am going to do is run it up on here and see how much power it has. I know that sounds pointless. I know people will be looking at it going, why? Because I want to. Because I can. I did also say in the Daihatsu Syrian dyno video a little while ago that it was going to be the last outing for the dyno Wall of Fame. But I've decided to leave it on here one more time for this car. Can you hear that? What is it? Why are you crying? I said wall. The Board of Fame. I think the Trabant may end up down here. This is a Citroen 2CV. That is where a Citroen 2CV is meant to be. I'm not saying it's meant to be at the bottom, and not because it's Hubnut's car. that is the right place for a 2CV to be. It's only a little 650cc engine. There's a Citroen GSA above it, which isn't supposed to be there. And then there's an Austin Allegro above it, which is kind of a little bit lower than it's meant to be, but not massively. Now, if you go on book figures, this car produces, I've written this down because it's a big number and I have to remember it, 26 brake horsepower at 4,200 RPM and 40 pound-feet of torque at 3,000 RPM. Now, you might laugh, and you probably are, but it's only a 594cc engine. So 26 horsepower for 590 odd cc is the equivalent of, say, 55 horsepower for a 1.2, which is bad, admittedly, but that's what a Vauxhall Nova used to have back in the old days, so it's not actually that insane. What is insane is the fact this car is a two-stroke engine. Let's have a look at the engine. You can see, well, you can't really see it, but I'll show you what's under the bonnet. Getting familiarity vibes here. This looks like a big round cylinder and a fuel tank and a muff, but it's actually an engine. This is a two-stroke inline 594cc engine. The fuel tank is in the engine bay here, which is, it sounds mildly concerning, I know, but yeah, I mean, there's probably more dangerous things on this car. And that's about it. It has a transmission on the end of the gearbox. If you look down there, there is a transmission there. I recently discovered there's a bit of a myth that people seem to think the Fiat 127 was the first front-engine transversely mounted car to have a gearbox on the end of the engine, but this hails from 1950-something. So while I rig this up, there is one other thing to be aware of with this car, which we can have a little look at and experiment. You see, because this is a two-stroke engine, there are a couple of differences between this and a regular four-stroke engine. This car basically has the same number of power strokes per revolution, if you like, as a four-stroke engine, four-stroke, four-cylinder engine. So the fact it only has two cylinders isn't the same as a 2CV. A 2CV is much more, there's a bigger gap between the firing of the cylinders, may seem a little more laboured. This, by comparison, is zippy. Although it also has a very heavy flywheel, and it has to have a very heavy flywheel for reasons. One of the interesting things this car does have, and I'm keen to see how this affects the rolling road dyno. I'm not going to go into massive detail, but what you need to know is that when you do a rolling road run, you start the engine, you build it up to fourth gear, which is the closest 1-to-1 ratio. This car, unfortunately, it's 1.1, so it's still not quite a 1-to-1 ratio. Everything is geared down. But you accelerate up to fourth gear, and then the dyno picks, well, you pick a speed on the dyno, you accelerate, the dyno has a big fat magnetic brake down there which brakes and fights against the car, and then allows the car to accelerate at a predetermined rate and measures the torque the car has created in doing so. When you reach the end of your rev range, you come off the throttle and you dip the clutch simultaneously, and then the engine, the whole thing coasts down. So the engine is now isolated from the transmission, and the wheels and the transmission, everything coasts back down. The dyno takes, it can measure the drag on these, and basically it adds it all together and it gives you an approximate power figure. It cannot be factual. The only way you can make this factual is to take that engine out and bolt it onto an engine dyno. But this dyno is actually surprisingly good, very close for a rolling road dyno. Now, the problem you have with that in a two-stroke engine is normally if you drive down the road in a two-stroke engine, when you put your foot on the throttle, that's how you're lubing the engine up, because the oil is in with the fuel. So it's going through the crankcase and getting sucked up into the combustion chamber, and that's where how the oil goes through. Now, if you don't inject fuel, i.e. you go down a long downhill section and come off the throttle, you've got no oil going in effectively, but the engine is still at high speed. So what this car has is a freewheel. The easiest way to think of a freewheel is actually very simple. You have a push bike, probably. You know when you pedal, and then you stop pedaling, but the bike carries on. It's a ratchet. That's basically what it's got. On fourth gear, this car has that. So if the input speed becomes slower than the output speed, i.e. the car is going faster than the engine wants to because it's going downhill, it just ratchets, it just freewheels. So it doesn't kill the engine. Now, this doesn't mean anything on the dyno, because on the dyno you would push the clutch down. But what I want to know is there a difference in drag between the freewheel or the conventional way of putting the clutch down? In theory, the only thing that's changing in those two is that with the freewheel, the input shaft is still spinning. It's just disengaged. Whereas if you push the clutch down, the whole lot stops. well, the output side of it obviously moves, but the top bit of it stops as well. Now in theory that's not going to make any difference, but I'm intrigued to find out, so we should probably do that. Never in doubt. It's that time, place your bets.
Place your bets now!
Will this hit the 26 horsepower that's quoted online, or will those figures be a little bit exaggerated? Yeah, all my junk is getting covered in smoke. Right, that's interesting. Look at that. 29. It's only supposed to have 26, remember. Slightly overboard, this thing. Not by much. Did note a tiny amount of clutch slip, but minuscule, and only really at the beginning. I think that's probably what this little dip here is. Funny how the gauge, well, the graph is a bit bleh. Normally you'd look at that graph and you'd say, you know, with a normal car, oh, it could be down to air fuel mixture or something like that. But on this thing, it could be air fuel or oil mixture, because I imagine the amount of oil you've got in the fuel will affect how much power the engine makes. If you get it wrong, it'll probably make a difference. I don't think it has got 129 pound-foot. I think that's at the wheel. 50! Yay! 50 pound-foot. That's still more than it's meant to have. That's not bad, is it? 29, if you listen carefully, you might be able to hear the sound of a man in West Wales soiling himself. So we're going to do another run, but this time I thought I'd show you the gears. It's a funky little interior, this. The throttle is in the passenger side. The brakes are actually surprisingly responsive. The clutch pedal feels like it isn't connected. There's just no weight at all. But this is the gear lever. It looks like the indicator stalk, but it's not. That's over here. So the gear lever, we're going to go... This is basically going across the gate, and we're going to go down for first, and then up for second, and then that's third. None of the other gears have the freewheel, it's only the fourth. Now that's fourth. The dyno's biting. I'm flat out. This time I'm going to freewheel it. That feels so weird. Lower power losses. Now the owner did actually suggest, he thought that might happen. He genuinely thought that on the freewheel it might have less drag than with the clutch down, and he might be right. 28.1, 3,049 pound-foot. If anything, it's not happy, is it? Look at this. It's good here, and then it all just goes belly up. So I'm going to do another one more with the clutch down and see what happens. I don't think it's going to be any better than 29, but I'm just intrigued to know what happens. .27. Power losses have dropped again, so it doesn't appear to make a difference whether you're letting it freewheel or dip the clutch. And the power losses, they can vary. They're not always identical, because obviously the tyre temperatures are changing, the gearbox oil temperature is changing. It looks to me like the freewheeling, having it freewheel or having it run with the clutch dips on the overrun makes no difference. It's a pointless test because it means nothing. 29 was its best, so that would put it 20. There. That's not bad, is it? I mean, regardless whether you say it was the 27, the 28 or the 29, it was only supposed to have 26. Yes, it is slightly overboard, but it's time to perhaps not laugh at the Trabant. That car has done exactly what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to kick out 26 horsepower. It's battered 26 horsepower. Well, it hasn't battered it. It's like done one more and then two more and three more, but it's done a bit more. It's basically on this board, we expected it to be down here and it is down here, but it's done what it's expected to do. Not all the cars on there do. There's like that one, Belingo, Bella. That was bad. That was really bad. Or my van, my Iveco daily van. That was awful. This has done what it's supposed to do. Hell, I've had Ford Capri 2.8s come on here before. Ford Capri 2.8 injection, a car everyone loves and looks back to and reveres, right? They fall so short of their quoted book figures on the dyno, which is supposed to be 160 horsepower, and they never are. The difference between what they put out and what they're quoted is almost a Trabant. So, which one deserves more respect? I'm not coming after Capri owners, by the way. It's just the one that popped into my head at the time. Well done, you Duraplast beauty. Let's put it on the board. Now, this Trabant was brought to us by Ed's Plastic Cars on Instagram. You can go and follow him to check out more of his, more of his plastic cars. My writing has gone awful there. Now it says Ed's Plastic Ears. Okay, Ed's Plastic Ears has done, we're going to say 29, was it 29? 29 on the nose, 29 horsepower at 3,400 revs, 50 pound-foot of torque at 2,500, so it's doing well. So 29 bhp, which is +3. Now this is the last car that's going to go on the wall. No, it's been 30 years, let it go. The last car that's going on this board until the board gets a revamp, and as I mentioned in the other video the other day with the Daihatsu, which is that one, is going to be an online version of this with more cars on it and more details, more nerdy details. If you like that kind of thing, that will be on my website. I'll put a link on the videos when that appears, but basically, well, I'll put a link in the description now to the website if you just want to buy merch or something, but yeah, the graphs will appear online. And that concludes the life of this board. It's headed by a Saab 9.5 and it's supported by a Trabant 601S. That's a Saab 9.3, not a Saab 9.5.